everyone, and welcome to tonight's event. This is the very last event of the Sheaf Poetry Festival, which has been running all weekend, ever since Thursday, in fact. So welcome back, those of you who've been to stuff before. I'm Genevieve Carver. I am the festival poet in residence, and my residency this weekend has all been around the themes of well-being and mental health. So tonight we're going to have readings from three fantastic poets, Dorey, Sarah Wardle and Caroline Bird. After which we're going to have a bit of a panel discussion around this relationship between poetry and mental health. The format's going to be, we'll have a reading from Ben, a reading from Sarah, then a reading from Caroline. Then I'll have a little bit of a chat with the poets, and then there will be the opportunity for you to ask audience questions. If questions pop into your head during the readings or during the chat afterwards, please just put them into the chat box on YouTube at any point, and they will be magically sent over to me and I can ask them at the end. Please be kind in your questions and remember that the poets aren't under any obligations to answer anything. They don't have to, but I think we're going to have a really interesting discussion. The first poet I'm going to introduce is Ben Dorey. He is a poet and lecturer in mental health. His educational work incorporates critical approaches to psychiatry, psychology, and society within the context of recovery. He is studying for a PhD at the University of Sheffield, combining creative writing, critical analysis, and reflections on his own experiences of madness and the health and social care system. His first pamphlet, Seven Hills, was published by Spirit Duplicator in 2017, and he'll also be reading from his new collection, which he's working on as part of his PhD study. So please welcome Ben.
Thank you, Jev. All the poems I'm going to read this evening are from a collection which is provisionally called The Speaking Silence, and that's kind of in recognition that poetry can try and speak what's a very unsilent world of experience in madness, but often it's a kind of discourse that is shut down as pathological or meaningless. So all the poems have multiple voices sort of centre around the speaking poetic I, as the kind of self-fragments or multiplies in madness. And one powerful voice is this figure called the Guardian, who I've encountered since childhood as a sort of mad experience. I've actually got a poem I wrote about this Guardian figure when I was 5. And I'm horrified of the experience of madness and by this Guardian figure, but also it makes me think beyond myself, and it enables me to hold multiple perspectives at once without the obligation to sort of sanely decide on which is my own. And I've often kind of discussed it with people as a sort of negative capability, which is something John Keats talked about, but it's forced upon me. And the sequence also has images interspersed with the text, which are kind of multiply exposed photographs, which I kind of think is an interesting metonym for that layering of perspectives and changes in perception of time and world that constitute part of madness. And so for the duration of me reading, I'm just going to set one of those up as my background. There we go. Okay, and I'm going to start reading now. So, first poem is called Jubilee. Open the skylight, despite the drop below zero, led by the soft sleet's patter of promise on glass, drawn to the mist of forming dew and diesel fumes. All phenomenal sounds are muffled into white noise, pocked by smothered fireworks. One of us tries to remember a time we weren't haunted, a memory of cold as dampening divisions, frost fur rules the way ice joins leaves in a carpet. Explosions refracted through fog linger on retinas as long as the bounce of their sound through valleys. Stripes of streetlight frame the dark of the park, and the halting red shift of signals 3 crow miles off on Manor Top. It's there the thought pauses in traffic, dragged from the warped nostalgia TV series tucked up the gleedless valley to the reverberant air of caves. There's something we need to remember, something whose dream we've rewound so often, its playback is more noise than image. We drift, I drift, sifting the crackle back to grikes and becks that laid down their patterns as rhythms that run through our words and the rain, our landscape and veins, both stilled by the clutch of the cold. Past screes guarding Atomire's scar, in a cave system named for the crown, a daydream damned the world's course. Now back at the skylight, the city's drone begins to differentiate. Particulars clang apart as the eye acclimatizes and the eardrum comes taut. 5 of us wander in separate streets, some sheeted by stormwater, some lakes of floodlight and mica, all fading away as we try to write them. We duck and press earlobes to oncoming dogfights and the silent oblivion of rocket flight, the memories screamed into dust, the faces dawning this fright. 5 years old and the torch dies, with our father's voice in the echoing cast, where the clock hands of stalactite drips tick forever, and void lifts the veil from your eyes. As the street sound recedes, and the fog curtains in, and sirens diminuendo, a form takes shape in the dancing cave shadows, and, handshaking, that 5-year-old we part control rubs warmth into the batteries. A tungsten flicker strobes a prayer through the nothing, before laughter smothers everything, and the light tide retreats to the filaments dimming coil. It's on you now, begin or be gone. So that poem was kind of dealing with the very earliest experiences, but viewed from the present, looking backwards of madness that I'd had. And the next one talks about the education system kind of dimming that magical world to some extent. And it starts with a quote by Roy Fisher. To be traceable, however small, to be material, to have status in the record, to have the rest, the unwritten, even more easily scrapped. To the letter. Sometimes my window is swung by unexpected chords scored by the page and the memory. Today, Roy Fisher's red lead struck a note above 2-stroke and a Vespa throttled skywards from the booster seat. 4-star chimes the Tristan chord, the tinny voice of school keyboards, the rattle of gales on single glazing, an anamnesis where knots and scales could cloak his unfocused penumbra. Small hands stretching a 5th across ivory, counterpoint a 20-year sus4, envelope attack snappy, release set to ad infinitum. As red and lead clang, so vertical fell to the unity of units. Now equipped with reason for a second visit, on the class trip Sellafield was merely mechanical. The rainbow arcing the Irish Sea became the work of prisms, and the Guardian was hidden. Schooled in, certainties were as easy to assimilate as racism. A division addiction started young, enriched us through derision. Those who gorged rose quick and earned gold stars. Cut grass forced down shirt collars, left skin and cotton lime and crimson, fading to umber as life decayed. I watched the process, absorbed. A self emerged, so assured and sincere, it had no need to write. So now we struggle to welcome it in, to make memory ring true with a time when the rhythm of vision was Euclidean, gridded the waves of wind through bracken, measured its reddening under the sun. The encounter smiles a protracted smile that I feel across my lips, and Selford sings in major keys, or minor modes shoved aside with pomp and circumstance. Don't you want to live? Not my lips mouthed with their instrumental grin. If you don't want to harm, then sink. Let the often dreamt drift of cells into trees and mycelium sift you into others, but don't expect to write a letter home. The next poem kind of deals with an entrance to a psychiatric ward, but from the perspective of total madness. It's called An Entrance. door locked from the inside, yet marked by desperate scratches. Room cloaked with ash, tab ends spilling from plates onto threadbare floor, thousands of nerve-shredded breaths. Scared, soiled corners ringed with the drone of dung flies. Driven inside by the suspect gaze, shoppers crossing the street away from this lumbered olanzapine wanderer. By the catch of doors click closed to avoid the question posed and vacantly creaking the floorboards. Small room's cacophony of criticism bears down on a coiled boy, on mattress springs vibrating with the weight of fear shaking, the sunrise black, the becks trickle red beneath window. Inside images torture, hooded figures debased in first person, despite voices speaking your evil in language biblical and personal. Your angered father, mother, accents twanging guts like guitar strings until you're retching over the sink. Now rising, see my Antichrist, watching from the mirror, as your options shrink to ligature, knife blade, or an entrance into my flickering ellipsis. My eyes black orbs which eclipse the world as you raise your hand to mine. Sirens approaching. Time snapped open. Now proceeds so slow, each moment grows a world. A gun clap snatched from a remarked record starts the pack. Brains sprung open like cruel gates at Owlerton. Each bounding step now wraps the round of the track. A series of spirals, an endless chasing. And I'm a plague doctor beat with carnations and camphor, cloaked in robes of vermilion, extracting soul from the child I've whisked from the font. And I'm pulling the hood on enhanced interrogation, first person Abu Ghraib facing down the target as torturer. Target homogenized as brown skin by the newsreel, unnarrated by the hood, unhuman, now becoming a person as we realize the torture and deride us as my hands inflict the blows and feel the pain, not as abstracted ethics, but rather the imposition. My stories laid over theirs, a series of ink-black bruises and your voice barking trespass every time I try to perceive a life in the lee of mutual destruction. I'm flying B-52s, carpet bombing Tutankhamun, dropping with the whistle of munitions to see the burnt out homes and tales I supported erasing. Then I'm crashing down the towers to justify my actions, which thrive in the white heat that melts the structure of glass and steel and blinds the vision into blankness from which new flights alight. You thrust me towards slavery to see and smell horror beyond statistics in a lightless hold. You rush me to the choirs of St. Paul's, the pain of empire as reverberating beauty in the top of the dome. Trespassing a voice. Shame, your voice, my voice, deride sorry sobs that cry for the succor of illness. You speaking my mouth, blame our mother for biology, letting you in, intergenerational chemical curse. You build a case on the power, shopping lists of the ICD-10, the mind doctors you bow to, the trembling, silencing science. Then we're unabsolving us, undermining the illness defense, attempting to gain ourselves strength. You're laying it thick with the foresight now, increasing the rhythm of vision, stacking moments like snare rolls, freeze framing each step of the bullet we sent, strobing its way to our cranium. You're flooding each moment with so much excess, time is laden, stooped with the weight for the next. The more I desire the projectile's arrival, the longer reach of its faltering steps. And this last poem, it's called Duvet Days, and kind of builds on what happened in the last one, where the guardian figure kind of took over thinking, and it was almost as if my mind was thinking more than one person's thoughts at once. And that's what this next poem tries to do as well. Duvet Days. Most grandiose guardians arrive in the swaddling of duvets, unmade at midday, ridged, valleyed, thrown into relief by cloud-quilted light. The plastic pen leaks oil, the plastic lens of glasses slick with oil. The toilet lets us transplant, defends it in the dock of my head, before my bitumen bootprints through Emirati terminals are recalled as unerasable evidence. Ligeti's requiem drones from my brain, some filmy stain of significance, slip through the in-flight entertainment system, cube an optical bedroom gaze at 38,000 feet. The Guardian's laugh is a learning and a torture, the reason and pending diagnosis. It plots the line from each sweet taste to starving mouth, shelled house, our encaged Syrian gnaws wooden fingers, tripping decency alarms, shouts to stop from the inner image police. I feel sick. Am I sick? Am I? At some tiny level, the trope of synapses flashing juxtaposes, composes new forms of chemical melancholia. As irresistible as, growing into the void, the heart pumps faster toward death. The scent of it intersects somewhere with the fake pine of toilet duck, rhyming along body-brain highways. No smell more dead than this. How to give this form and keep it true. How to con the reading eye to catch the light like silver ions as mirrors flit away for a fractured second. How to make the space of silence sing with words that vainly limp along a line. The Guardian's form sneers at these lame attempts to catch chaos in a seesaw of verbal ratios, then spiderwebs a thread that links our lives in spirals between the pins we pressed onto maps to stake our place as independent. Now children's fingers work to bone in minds, scratch the dark side of the touchscreen, making our own flinch away from the greasy scroll for a moment. It's not fact, but there's truth in that. Brent crude and coltan well in the tear ducts, dulling the eyes, strengthening the vision. A pill or a bunch could clip this thought's wings, take the grip of its roots from the loam of the waking mind. Money and titles and naming could carve its images into stone. But though the babble inside might ask you to end it, merely muting it makes its accusations true. And, decayed, they return like a note through a tape delay, each time more indecipherable, the pain of fuzz that cloaks its source. Should I suffer, still and ineffective at the signals and junctions life railroads me towards? The less you sense yourself, the more the bullets, blades and bombs make sense. Or is it the reverse that saves? That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben. And I'm so glad we got to see one of those photographs as well, which are a brilliant counterpoint to the word. So yeah, thank you. Our next poet is Sarah Wardle. Hi, Sarah. Sarah won Poetry Review's New Poet of the Year award in 1999, going on to have 5 collections with Bloodaxe Books. Her first collection, Feels Away, was shortlisted for the Forward Best First Collection Prize, and her 2009 collection, A Knowable World, charts the year spent in a psychiatric facility receiving treatment for bipolar disorder. She has been a Royal Literary Fund Fellow at Royal Holloway, University of London, and works as a creative writing tutor for Morley College, Westminster Kingsway College, and the Workers' Educational Association. Please give a warm welcome to Sarah.
Thank you very much, Genevieve and Susanna, for inviting me and to the Sheaf Poetry Festival. It's a delight to participate with such good poets too. I am going to read Flight from my first collection, which was about the experience of hospitalisation. Flight. The mother blackbird I've been feeding has flown in the open door of the kitchen, where she flutters against the stuck window like a butterfly finding no way through. A startled eye stares. In the flap of a wing, it all comes back, my heart beating so fast I thought it would explode, my mind and body in overload, running the corridors, fleeing nurses who seem stranger than another species, then trapped in a room with nowhere to go. How I was cornered at a safety window, which opened only far enough for air. How I didn't know there was no cause to fear. How they outnumbered me, fastened their grip, laid me down and injected me like rape. I cupped the bird gently in my hands like water, carry her out as if a section order has been lifted, give her to the air, then watch her spread her wings and soar. The next poem I'm going to read is using Shakespeare on rereading King Lear after Keats. Once more King Lear is raging on the heath, the fool is duelling with him, crossing words. Poor Tom acts in a theatre that's absurd and reasons on the run from fact and truth. For language, like an exile, can take flight from sense when meanings, like uprooted stems, are blown away to scatter on the wind and sow the seeds of rambling fear and doubt. I know, because I once played Lear myself and wandered far inside a foreign land whose speech and men I couldn't understand, that winter dressed in an asylum shift. Our rights alone in these unsettled times, fate could turn us out of our homes and minds. And the next poem I'm going to read is called Laws of Disturbance, and it uses the scientific discourse to be playful and talk about mental health. Laws of disturbance. If you apply constant pressure, happiness is proportional to ideas. Ideas travel at the speed of thought and differ only in their wavelength. Wavelength can be ascertained if you know how soon an answer comes. Answers are only ever emitted from dark questions which absorb passion when heated. The total current of passion flowing in must be the same as the passion leaving. When passion moves faster than the thought it generates, then mania is set up behind it. The acuteness of an incidence of mania depends on the refracted angle in the other media. If a refracted angle exceeds the critical one, total internal reflection of the self will happen. When cells associate to form a pair, superconductivity of synapses occurs. As the siren of the synaptic orchestra draws nearer, frequency of self-importance and pitch grow higher. Once your importance starts to gather momentum, it has a tendency to keep on moving. When you're on a roll, opposing force is all that'll make your anger cease. Your anger stops and emotions change direction when a change in flux is caused by sedation. The change in flux is in direct proportion to the length and severity of depression. The depressive is one of two colliding spheres. One's energy picks up, the other's disappears. Equilibrium can be reached when a mind is balanced on a knife edge or rooted on the ground. In the subatomic world of mood, we can measure only intensity or truth. If we were to rewind the universe, joy and grief would reduce to the same force. And then in my second book, I write this one, which ends on a thought about mental illness, Pacific Storm. In Kenting National Park, on the southernmost tip of Taiwan, I almost walked into the curtained web of a spider the size of my hand. But then from a vantage point, like age or a plane's altitude, I could see the terrain of rainforest like a mountain range or cloud, and I thought as a storm was approaching, like a fleet or a car wash brush, that not even a 3-minute warning heralds the first drop of madness. And then I'm just going to read a short one from a book, A Knowable World, which was about being detained in hospital for a year. Mother's Flowers. Daffodils in this drab room trumpet not only spring, but an end to these weeks of gloom when I'll again be walking, clear of this section order. These flowers represent the sun, a time when Seri's daughter rejoins family, life and freedom. And then this was a snowy Easter. Snow from Ebury Ward. Each snowflake is a minute of detainment, filling the air with falling measures of time, not settling but hitting the ground to melt, like wasted hours sectioned for losing one's mind. Sometimes the wind eddies the snowflakes upwards, and they take longer to sink as moments stall, like the sensation that time is going backwards, that we're forgotten and no hopes left at all. But somewhere in me there is still delight to see each snowflake as in a Midlands winter, and though down south it doesn't stick, the sight of snow in March gives us a white Easter. By lunchtime there's no trace, but half a day has been ticked off the time I'll spend away. I don't know how much time I've got actually, so this is from another book. I am going to do this one called Natural Science. And again, it looks at the, this time looking at the difference between scientific language and the kind of, so it's about scientific language versus the actual experience and the difference between that, the gap between it, natural science. That the way trees breathe is photosynthesis does not describe summer's glorious green. That the human body has an epidermis tells nothing of touch or the sun on skin. That a rose is a means of reproduction amidst its beauty, thorn and scent. That taste is but a stage in nutrition, misses the cherished sweetness as we eat. That mankind evolved on the savannah, cause but is not pleasure at seeing for miles. That the eye is pupil, lens and retina, is less than my sensed image of a smile. That rain is the water cycle of oceans, forgets just how a cloudy day feels. That music is sound waves meeting membranes, loses the soul of Beethoven's symphonies. That the Earth's satellite is formed of rock, cannot catch the awe of a full moon. That mind and thought are synaptic, is not sufficient to explain what ideas mean. That the heart is muscle, vein and valve, ignores the wonder when we sense it leap. That the selfish gene is more precise than love, will never make that one word obsolete. And I'm just like to, I feel it's probably time to wind up. So I will read from this book, 2 poems, one called On Empty Street, which I wrote in hospital as some of my poems I have written in hospital. On Empty Street. The street of empty homes rings with the fall of rain on cobbles and the sink from grace of a community where once the tall helped the weaker to a better place. Sleet hammers on the corrugated iron that mask the doors and windows of each house. Weeds sprout from gutters in this wild ruin where social housing goes to rat and mouse. Once begged to vote for industry and jobs, the unemployed of this abandoned town were let down not by reds but brainless sods in boardrooms for whom the merry-go-round goes on as steely CEOs jump ship, while ghost town streets like this that could be filled with doorbells and washing are Atlantis, from whose seabed young tree roots have now spilled. But turn into the side road at full moon, and tricks of mind and light might let you see the dead marching for right to an old tune, sung on the wind and for equality. There hung from old chimney pots a banner, strung like Christmas lights in a southern town, demands work for all, beats of a drummer, here are sent skyward as protesters turn, the corner brushing past you in the cold, striding out of the 19th century into the 21st, shouts loud and bold, echoing justice and democracy. Blink again and this narrow street has changed, back now to its true state of emptiness, while an empty state leaves child runaways and those on the streets vulnerable and homeless. And I'd just like to end on a poem celebrating the nurses who helped me recover each time that I have been unwell, and this is called Night Nurses. My heroes are not the ones who kill, but the everyday kind, like night nurses, who emerge shining into the day as if we're just waking. If they're lucky, they might have snatched a brief break between doing battle with acute cases and police arrivals, or on the rare times the ward is quiet, they'll still have spent hours reassuring through tired smiles the ones who can't sleep. Now they go as the next shift comes, fresh with a sense of work well done, returning home to their own charges, their husbands who too need looking after, and children who have learnt to love their softness. Where are the statues and memorials for all the heroines who protect us? I would march for peace and the hand that holds, not shoots. Isn't it time these women were also remembered? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I think a word you said yourself then was playful, and that's something I really love about your work. There's kind of lightness to it in and amongst everything else. And we're going to move on to our last reader now, which is Caroline Bird. So Caroline is a poet and playwright with 6 collections published by Carcanet. Her fifth collection, In These Days of Prohibition, was shortlisted for the 2017 T.S. Eliot Prize and the Ted Hughes Award. It uses surreal imagery to venture into the badlands of the human psyche and includes reflections on time spent in rehabilitation from substance abuse. She's a two-time winner of the Foyle Young Poets Award. She won an Eric Gregory Award in 2002 and was shortlisted for the Geoffrey Dermer Prize in 2001 and Dylan Thomas Prize in 2008 and 2010. Her sixth collection, The Air Year, was the winner of the Forward Prize 2020. So please welcome Caroline.
Hello, thank you for having me in this elastic, stretchy room that we're all in. So in my early 20s, after a series of unenjoyable adventures, I ended up in a rehab facility in the middle of the Arizonian desert. And the first thing they do when you get to one of these places is they give you a questionnaire full of these horrifically simple questions about how you've been treating yourself. And the first thing that I did was I went back to my room and I translated this questionnaire into a poem. For example, the question, have you ever experienced a psychotic episode, became, have you started to look at pigeons like they know something? I'll read you that poem now. You can answer the questions in your head. They start off easy and get harder, I think. Patient intake questionnaire. Do you taste pepper whilst eating ice cream? Do sandwiches appear intricately designed? Do you think of waterfalls when lighting a match? Have you started to look at pigeons like they know something? Do you think about your chin when you are kissing? Can you feel the blood in your thumb? Do your eyebrows feel like stickers? Do you look twice at your name on a letter? Does your hair hurt? When barefoot, do your shoes feel too tight? Can you sense the tiny holes in the cotton of your shirt? Do you peel bananas fearfully in case there is no banana inside? Does the ceiling occasionally ripple? Does your neck feel like a bone? Has your pillow developed a strange echo? Do you hear sex noises through the wall when standing in a field? Then my counsellor found out that I was doing this to all of the paperwork, turning them into poems, and we had a bit of a confrontation, which years later became this sonnet, a surreal joke. 1 year was blank on my curriculum vitae. I was in the desert, convalescing, repairing my septum. I'd tried to die expensively, locked in my university bathroom with a rolled up scrap of Canto. I forgot how to love my family. At one point, my arms turned completely blue. My assigned counsellor told me I used poetry to hide from myself, unhook the ballast from my life, a floating ruse of surreal jokes. He stole my notebook. I said, they're not jokes. He said, maybe try to write the simple truth. I said, why? And that relationship with the simple truth has stayed with me throughout my career as a poet, in the way that, like, surrealism has just as much been about avoidance of pain as it has been from trying to clarify what the pain looks like. It's a bit like, if you imagine you're standing on burning hot sand, you don't want to stand still because it hurts, so you dance. And as a result, I've had a lot of people think my poems are jokes, which a lot of them are funny and contain jokes, but the joke has come from the fact that I had to dance on the pain. So generally, the funnier the poem, the worse I felt when I was writing it. One day I'll get really, really happy and just write incredibly grave poems non-stop. So this is a one for my new book, trying to kind of capture what it feels like to be in that heightened world, and of, you know, surrealism obviously means sur as in on top of, which is also how the illness feels. Loughborough. No one dies here or chews their food properly. We break bread rolls in half and choke until we gulp. We stay up all night talking animatedly to dial tones. We hit small children whenever we gesticulate. Occasionally someone faints and we hold a funeral, then applaud and cheer when they inevitably revive, shouting, "It's a miracle!" We shout miracle a lot. When the coffee is drinkable, when the drizzle stops. No one keeps receipts. Our tenement buildings are modelled after comfortable Scandinavian prisons. So we get our groceries home delivered, chill out most of the year, lightly repent. Everyone has a running machine facing a blue wall. The most beautiful woman in the world around here is called Samantha, and she loves me. She sent a letter telling me so. I read it to my cactus and it flowered. My yearning often paralyzes me in my armchair for entire days. The phone just rings and rings. Samantha leaves long voicemails screaming, "Wake up!" Petrified I'm dead. She's adorable like that. I'm an addict. I keep a pill on the roof of my mouth but never swallow it. I will never swallow it. No one dies here or grinds their pepper. We pour peppercorns onto our pasta. In our crumbling music halls, we sing about finality and trail off before the last verse. Laugh, pour a big wine. We don't end relationships, we let them overlap indefinitely until we forget their names. Christmas is a shit show. Everything comes out. We spend ages stuffing the lies back into ourselves. Samantha wants to move to a different town. She says our local traditions are enfeebling. Our quicksand foot spas, our seated silent discos, our in-house pub crawls, just crawling around a pub, our shame bracelets. She uses insidious 5 times in one sentence. She says she could love me forever if I ran away with her to somewhere bright with breathable fabrics, without the faces of ex-lovers plastered on all the billboards plus their phone numbers, a place where people are allowed to move on, get well, find a different answer to their lives. But I'm your answer, I tell her, and you're mine. Why would you want to find an answer that isn't me? She sighs and says, "Oh, Caroline," in that hurt twang, like I'm missing the point. I put on Suzanne by Leonard Cohen, but she kicks the record player, shouting, "No, I will not touch your perfect body with my mind. I want a nourishing relationship." Then storms out before I can feed her an orange. I lie beneath the bubbles of my bath all day, breathing through a curly straw. Samantha's not like the others. She expects something from me. I wish I knew what. It's funny, it's like when you're writing a poem, you know that you're getting somewhere honest when you read it back, and it makes you feel vulnerable and exposed, and makes you like regret that you wrote it. Another thing that can make me write a poem is, you know, that feeling of being unheard, you know, that might make you leave like 5 or 6 voicemails on someone's phone when you know that's too many. So this poem came from that type of feeling, which is a type of ill feeling, isn't it? But it's also very generative, because you want to speak so much. It's called Anaesthetic. Just one word. Send me one word. Lozenge, any word. Lysol, shellac, ditto, and I'll feel better for an hour until the pain comes back. And then I'll need 2 words. Any 2 words. Dessert fork, shipping agency, frosty fields, and I'll feel better for 45 minutes. And then I'll need 3 words. I love you. Boom. I'll feel better for a whole entire day. Just smacked off my face on reciprocation. Say it again. Say it twice. I love you is 6 words. Now pimp it up. Add so much with all my heart until I die. I'll feel better for a minute. Then I'll get itchy, sick. Fist banging on your door at night, demanding words. You owe me 10 words. I can't bear this anymore. I'm going crazy without you. Say that. I'll scrape up the butts of old words from past messages and suck on them till my lips burn. I'll start asking for things that don't make sense. Carve love into my leg. Spray paint the walls of my womb. Inject me with kisses. Make my blood read it. I'll get the twitches, the shakes, the cold sweats, the dream where I'm 3 foot tall, whispering, talk to me, to a shock of golden curls which slowly turns to reveal its face, looks just like the back of its head. But for now, I only need 1 word. Rowanberry, filament, plank. Though of course, sometimes when you're feeling ill, it makes you, you don't see everything in heightened colors all the time. Sometimes it does the opposite. You feel a lot less, and then the poems come out more slowly. This is called The Deadness. It's like being a windmill in a vacuum-packed village. Weekends are the worst. The taste of nothing is like licking dew off plastic. Floppy soul, they call it. Slack spirit. Neurological pins and needles. Someone has drilled a hole in the crown of my head, inserted a funnel, emptied molten margarine into my plumbing. Darling, are you listening? Did you know same-sex mice can procreate now? You're already mid-anecdote about a colony of gannets or a colleague's kidney stone removal. You're stomping your wet boots, bashing white sprinkles from your hat. But the air hasn't moved in months. Either we're living in separate weathers or you have fake snow on your coat. I found that sometimes I can, when I'm feeling better, I can get into a habit of romanticizing times when I felt worse, especially if it meant that the poems were flying out of me because I was so miserable, which is a dangerous thought to have, that and complicated. This is called sanity. I do kind gestures, remove my appendix. I put my ear to a flat shell and nothing. I play the lottery, ironically, get married, have a smear test. I put my ear to the beak of a dead bird. Nothing. I grow wisdom teeth, jog. I pick up a toddler's telephone. Hello? No answer. I change a light bulb on my own. Organize a large party, hire a clown, attend a 4-day stone walling course, have a baby, stop eating Cocoa Pops. I put my ear right up to the slack and gaping bonnet of a daffodil. Get divorced, floss, describe a younger person's music taste as just noise, enjoy perusing a garden centre, sit in a pub without drinking. I stand at the lip of a pouting valley. Speak to me! My echo plagiarizes. I land a real love plus 2 real cats. I never meet the talking bird again, or the yawning hole, the panther of purple wisps who prowls inside the air. I change nappies, donate my eggs, learn a profound lesson about sacrifice, brunch. No singing floorboards, no vents leaking scentless instructions. My mission is over. The world has zipped up her second mouth. And I'm going to end on this next one, because sometimes when you're in, You don't necessarily want to be completely sane to write poetry. There's a Robert Lowell quote where he says, "My mind is not right." You know, we want to amplify things and make, I mean, what is a simile or a metaphor but a mistake? You know, when you're a kid and you go, tears are a bit like the ocean. There's that slippage, but you want to be able to control it as well, and it not to control you. So it's complicated, but this is called Surrealism for Beginners. Thank you very much for listening. We're trapped inside a movie, apparently. Last month, the grand secret was disclosed to us via these giant faces in the sky, claiming to be producers benevolently dropping by to let us know we were characters trapped inside their movie, and that every decision we made from now on would be in the script. And therefore, we shouldn't blame ourselves too much or get overly self-critical. Some of us were villains, some bit parts, some heroes, but everyone was necessary for the story and important in their own way. Then the sky went blank and everyone turned to each other and made that sound crowds make after receiving unexpected news. Hubbub, hubbub. We're in a movie, of course, people kept shouting. It all makes sense now. So that's why my shoes don't come off. So that's why I'm always losing money on the same horse. So that's why I gel my hair like a vampire. I am a vampire. I knew I looked too young to be a grandma, said my grandma. What am I, 38? They all seemed so reassured, so validated. The next day, they resumed their roles with gusto. The greengrocer started throwing apples at children as a gesture of goodwill and then winking. My auntie began consciously bustling through doorways. Tramps cut the fingers off their gloves, practiced saying, "God bless us all," then coughing in chorus. Nothing really changed exactly. Reality just got more pronounced, like someone underlined the word normal in our stage directions, you know? But I'm not buying it. Trapped inside a movie. What is this? Surrealism for beginners? Yes, I keep bursting into song whenever the streetlights come on. Yes, I keep chasing the girl of my dreams across New York. Yes, we walk hand in hand across the moonlit river as the disembodied voice of Ella Fitzgerald drifts through the glowing blossom trees. But these are merely facts and not the whole truth. I don't care what the producers in the sky say. They're not in my heart. They don't know the subtle earthquake of her eyes. I don't care if there's a script with these lines written in it, or some douchebags throwing popcorn at a screen. I can't see a screen. I can't see anything but her. And I need to tell her how I feel. And my boat leaves in the morning, and she is on the other side of Manhattan.
Thank you so much, Caroline. I absolutely love that idea of controlled slippage. I think that's a brilliant way of describing things. So I'd like to invite all the poets to come back to have a little bit of a chat. I personally have lost Caroline. She's frozen, but hopefully she'll be back. I don't know if the rest of you can see her. But yeah, I'm gonna just fire a few questions over to all the poets initially. And again, if you're in the audience, feel free to start posting your questions if you haven't already done so onto the YouTube chat. But first, I just wanted to ask the poets. Each of you has written poetry through or about periods of your life when your emotional states might have been like distressing or traumatic. And I'm interested in the role that poetry can play for you in that process of recovery. And I'm wondering, is there anything about poetry in particular, either writing or reading it, that can help us understand and even improve our mental health?
Well, I think it has a focus and concentration that is really helpful. And I don't know whether poetry makes you better or whether it's indicative of the fact that you're healing, but definitely I think it can give you a quick reward. and it can give you better concentration, and yeah, it definitely helps.
Welcome back, Caroline. I'm glad we haven't lost you for good.
When did I freeze?
We made it to the end of the poem. It was perfect, actually.
Was it at the end of the last poem that I read?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Because I suddenly thought, maybe I did the whole reading to myself, which would have been very meta.
No, don't worry. You held out just to the end, and I'm so glad you're back. I've just been asking about whether poetry can play a role in recovery and whether it can help us understand our mental health in any way. So I don't know if, Ben, have you got thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. So, well, partly my job is a day job in mental health services in a team called the Recovery Education Unit. So we're always looking at the ingredients of recovery, and it's our very strongly held belief that part of mental health recovery involves having control of your story and is to do with power. And I think poetry is a really, I think, like Sarah said, it kind of focuses the mind, and that can be quite healing, but also it's a place where you can express yourself in relative safety. Like, I can write things in a poem that if I said, this is just what I believe, to a psychiatrist, they'd be like, well, that's completely crazy. You're utterly psychotic. We need to up your medication. So in a sense, the poem can be a place where you take some power back and actually give meaning to those kind of mad experiences. Like, they can't be delegitimized. I don't think that's just poetry. I think in writing in general, but
I was interested in what you said, Caroline, about a particular counsellor who obviously didn't necessarily hold that view. Do you want to maybe elaborate?
Well, it's on one level, all poetry, as Dean Young said, is a form of hope, right? Because you're writing, leaning out the blank page like a window, wanting to communicate with some kind of peopled loneliness on the other side. It's such a sentimental act, writing a poem, and it's all about connection and believing that someone cares enough to be interested in your soul, whatever that is, So and you're taking something that's been destructive in your life and you're turning it into a poem, which is an alchemy. Right, so on that level, there is, and as Sarah and Ben were saying, the focusing of the mind. So on that level, it's good for you, but it's also poetry is a dangerous art. It's not simple. Like a trauma specialist will go, okay, go into the feeling, right? Now come back, and they'll be really controlled about it. Whereas, I've seen this when I'm doing poetry workshops. Often, in order to get the poem, people have to go right out onto the thin ice of themselves and stay there for, well, as long as the poem asks them to. And often that is longer than you would be asked to stay there in therapy. And there are times when personally, I have made choices between self-preservation and writing a poem, when I just know that the poem will, in writing it, there will be a cost to me. And yes, that might make me feel better later, but it won't necessarily make me well that day. But there's lots of crossovers between mental health and poetry, in the way that we're asking people, when you're teaching poetry, you're asking people to look at the world through a different lens, to see it in a way that no one else is seeing it. And to say things that, as Ben said, would, in a different context, would make people go, "You fucking what? What are you talking about?" Right? And so we have a kind of superpower in this parallel universe of poetry, where not seeing the world normally gives you a slight advantage sometimes. But then when that tips over into thinking every thought you have is absolute garbage, then that doesn't help at all. It makes it a lot harder. So it's very complicated, and there's lots of backs and forths in terms of it helping and hindering.
think one other place that it's been really important for me in the process of recovery, including reading work by Sarah and Caroline actually, but is that poetry, I think because of what you were saying, Caroline, in that it thrives off that difference in perspective, whilst there's something inherently normalizing about psychiatry where like a disorder is you think at deviance to how other people think, and in poetry that's a dangerous gift, I would like, definitely. And there's a project in America actually which calls mental health or illness or whatever you want to call it, or madness, dangerous gift. That's their approach to it and the way they work with people. But yeah, I think having poets, when you're in a process of total despair and thinking who I'm all alone with these thoughts which are at once removed from the rest of society, or I feel it can be such a lonely place, and reading other writers who are writing about mad experience, who aren't necessarily seen as mad but sometimes are, but they might be seen as mad but really believe in their madness, like William Blake or something like that. You can like look at those people and think, wow, okay, like I'm not just broken. Like there's something else there. And for me that's a really important part of recovery, to find sort of mad heroes, because you know the experience of recovery for mental health is not getting back to normal. It's learning to integrate those abnormal parts of your life.
Have you found that as well, Sarah, that do you ever feel like sometimes it's not a good idea, like it's too much to go into writing poetry?
I think some of the things I've expressed, I think some of them are ultimately negative feelings, but on the other hand, the act of expressing them and control, which particularly Ben talked about, I think that's really important. Also, writing in form, there's an element perhaps of control, or being in a safety net of the grid of a sonnet or whatever. And I do think when you're actually in hospital, what you said about control is so right, because there's really very little you can do apart from, I mean, once you've calmed down from running around and dancing on the tables, there's very little you can do apart from make endless coffee after coffee. So that the fact that you can do poetry is really exciting, and when it comes back, it gives you, it's like occupational therapy, really.
That's a nice word.
I think this one thing I would say is what being ill and being depressed teaches you is that you get used to the feeling of unraveling and unlearning and suddenly feeling helpless in your life. And actually that's something that's really necessary in order to write a poem, is you need to unlearn the world in order to encounter it. You need to feel like you've got no idea what's going on in a normal situation, and therefore that makes you primed for surprise from your own imagination. So that there can be a humbling feeling where you know that you know that every time you're writing, just like every day you're starting from scratch, you know, that can also help with the writing. Is it stops you from believing you know anything, which is really useful when you're writing poems.
Yeah, a nice way to put it. Ben, I just wanted to ask you about you've used the term madness in your work in quite a deliberate way, and I think you talk about this in the research that you're doing and the educational work that you do. Do you think you could just talk a little bit about kind of your perspective on madness?
Yeah, okay, so I guess to start with, I'd want to foreground this with saying, like Sarah, that there's some absolutely amazing people I've worked with in mental health services, nurses and people, colleagues now of mine, without whom I probably wouldn't be here today. So I think we need mental health services of some sort. But I think the concept of mental illness as conceived as sort of disorder, I won't talk here about why it's on shaky ground scientifically, but it's incredibly disempowering and quite oppressive form. Potentially, it holds a massive oppressive potential, and a lot of sort of research and the heroes of mine are people from a sort of, I mentioned some of the poets who stand by their madness, like William Blake or Emily Dickinson historically, or you know, loads of people who see meaning in it. I think John Burnside, someone who's done that sort of more recently and really explored madness as a powerful and meaningful kind of mode of being in the world, rather than a departure from being in the world where you get lost and to an illness. And I guess, yeah, the use of madness is not my, this isn't my idea, but it came from the mad movement of sort of mad pride in America, in Canada, and in the UK here, of locating madness as a form of being in the world, which sometimes makes you the subject to oppression in a similar way, you know, to other forms of oppression. And the idea of shouting loud that we're mad is not to say we're just ill, which kind of comes with that idea of maybe well-meaning de-stigma. Oh, look at those poor people. But actually, oh no, look, those people, they might be struggling. We might need to help them, but we should also listen to them, you know, in the same way as people needed allies in all other forms, you know, like fights against other forms of oppression need allies. But it's a bit like saying we're here, we're queer, I guess, or something like that. We're mad, we're proud. There's meaning in our experience beyond just some kind of pathology or
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's really, I don't know if anyone has anything to add on that, or if I should go on to the question. I wanted to ask you, Sarah, about the hope that I find over and over again in your writing, and whether sort of accessing that hope is something you're able to do when you're feeling bad, or whether it forms a part of this recovery process.
Well, thank you very much for finding hope in my work. I think that part of that might have come from teaching, because, for example, like some of the courses that I've taught have been writing for wellbeing, healing through memoir writing, that kind of thing. And I think maybe I've taken on the structure of an artistic structure onto experience. So, for example, a book like Christina Patterson's The Art of Not Falling Apart begins with difficulty and encounters lots of difficulty during the book, but has a hopeful ending. And I try to do that for the structure of my book Beyond in particular, going from praying for the dark things in London and the people going through really bad things, and then ending on finding love at the end of the book. And I think, yes, I think partly it's actually because I tend to be quite a hopeful person, hopefully. Yeah, the other thing is you can impose an artistic structure, and the other thing is it might have come out of classes I've taught where we've been trying to think more of gratitude.
Thank you. And then I just wanted to ask one question to Caroline before I move on to some audience question, which you already touched on a little bit, which is about the use of surrealism and humor and kind of how you play with those things in your poetry, and whether that is in a way to express something that isn't so easily expressed in like more normal terms, for want of a better phrase.
Yeah, well, as I said, that thing about kind of jaunty trauma and dancing on a feeling is part of it. It's also a little bit like every night when we dream, we're translating our fears and our hopes and everything that's going on into surreal imagery in order to process and to feel like things are in perspective, even though when we wake up we can't paraphrase it, you know, we got, and that's kind of how I feel about a poem. If a poem is working, you can't paraphrase it, but just like a dream, you feel like it is a translation, for want of a better word, of real feeling, and that is at the center of it. but somehow it needed to be transformed into this cinematic landscape in order to be seen. Because it's like, how do you see your own mind when you're inside it? It's like, it's often for me, writing a poem is like a process of projection, like a screen. It's like I'm painting a world, or flinging open the door of first line, stepping into it, and I am most of the time exploring what I'm seeing with my inside my brain. I very rarely write poems about things that I've actually seen with my outer eyes, though when I do, I'm very like pleased with myself, like, oh, I've opened my eyes today. But yeah, it's like, like if like an auntie might kind of go, let me look at you, and they'll push you away just to look at you, or you'll hold up a fiver to the light to check if it's real. That slight distancing that enables you to look at what's going on inside you. And for me, surrealism creates that distance, but it also, there's an element of disguise to it as well. I don't want people to read my diary. I'm actually a lot shyer than people would think. I've just learned how to speak with conviction about poetry, right? But and so surrealism allows me to conceal the facts of my life that I don't want people to know, but turn them into imagery. But in doing so, it means people can then read the poems and see themselves in them rather than just me, which is what you want. So yeah, it's that tension between the desire to communicate and the desire to hide.
Brilliant answer. And what you said about like the authenticity of feeling, I really get from all of your work, like no matter what images are happening or kind of the detail, it's that feeling that you're communicating, and that I think that poetry sort of allows you to communicate, definitely. I've got loads of questions from the audience, so I'm just going to fire these out. Most of them are non-specific to who they're being asked of, so I'll just fire them at you all if you like, and feel free to jump in. I thought this was quite an interesting question. How much does a finished poem about a traumatic episode or phase, or could even be about anything, how much does it differ from the first draft of the same poem?
I don't mind trying to answer that. Because yeah, that's something I experience a lot. I think something you were saying earlier on, actually, Caroline, about when a poem's working, it makes you feel a certain way when you sort of read it, and then you're like, oh god, and you feel quite exposed or something. But also it's this balance between that happening, but also when I feel a poem's finished, I kind of feel like it's got some kind of life of its own. Like it's the poem's something about the words, like you said, you couldn't paraphrase it. You just, it becomes something, and it can almost become a little bit alien to you yourself. It's become a thing. And I think for me, that's the difference. Quite often when I first draft a poem about a traumatic episode, it will actually just be, it happens in loads of different ways, potentially just a really graphic account of something awful that no one really wants to hear about, and it doesn't really make any sense for anyone to hear about it apart from me. Like it's for my own therapy, whilst when it becomes a poem, it takes on something I think, oh, that might actually be, that's not just about me anymore, that's a poem which might be interesting to anyone to read, and doesn't have to be tied to my biography, although it might be born there.
Yeah, I mean, for me, my first drafts, I mean, I'd like to think them almost as pre-first drafts. They're not even first drafts, and it's the equivalent of me trying to hack my way through a jungle, and I'm just trying to make a route forward. And if I showed you one of my notebooks, I think I've got one here. They're actually unreadable. They're like, it's like they're unreadable. They're so messy, and which creates a almost like unofficial coding system. Like if people tried to read my notebooks, they would be unable to. And then my second drafts, I go back and I actually make them even longer. If you imagine, you go back to the beginning of a of a path you've hacked, and then you just can walk down it slower, and I type it out and I add images that I didn't see the first time round, and I make it even messier. And then the third draft, that's when I start going, okay, what is this and what does it want to be? And I start looking at recurring images and the unity of the world and the logic of the dream, because even every like surreal world will have its own internal logic, and you have to figure out the rules to the world that you've created. And so often it will look drastically different, but I know along the line, if I keep all of my drafts, because often what can happen is I start over editing, and then I read it and I go, why is this dead? And it's because I've cut a line that was actually a major artery, and the whole thing. And so I then I go back to the first draft, and there'll be something about the life in that first draft, that the intent of it, that'll be really important to still feel in the final draft. And if I've lost that, then I know somewhere along the line I've edited out the truth of it, so they can be really different, but hopefully when you read them, they, as a poet, they feel the same.
What about you, Sarah? What's your drafting process like? Do you
I try to make myself finish a piece. So I think that's why I feel that poetry is good for you when you're recuperating, because of focus, concentration, but also it gives quite a quickish reward. Whereas, for example, in prose, I've written a novella which was a process of writing a bit each day, and you didn't get completion until about 3 weeks or so. Whereas with a poem, you can get completion on the day. I think it has to be said that there are poems that you just don't publish, and maybe that's the space for exploring things that just didn't work out, and they just go like flat balloons. But I try to finish it if I've got the time, and of course in hospital you do.
Yeah, an interesting perspective.
I like that question, get completion. It's nice. It's
kind of like poetry is instant gratification. Yeah. Camille put an interesting question about whether there are things that you want to write about, but you feel you struggle to put words on the page even years after. Are there things that you thought you experiences you wanted to write about, but at the end of the day it just doesn't happen? You find yourself not being able to do it.
There's something in that about, I think it was in the first poem, there's a metaphor I've used quite a lot in that sequence about like tape delays, which I don't know if anyone knows the musical geekery, but it's like an effects unit which actually uses a loop of tape, and it's just like the sound recording over and over and over itself, and each time it comes round, because tape is like imperfect, it gets more and more sort of like and like crackly and warped, and that experience is almost you can't write that experience anymore, because trying to write about it and struggling to write about it for so many times ends up polluting the actual memory which you're trying to write about. And I don't know whether that's like, a psychoanalyst or a trauma specialist or something would probably have something to say about how that's in a way the mind's way of protecting itself from actually, what otherwise might just be a flashback or total dissociation from your reality or something like that. But I don't know whether this is a real answer to the question, but I find the product of that fascinating in itself poetically. Like, it's like I've tried to come and write about this thing, but actually where it's led me, and I think that's quite often the way when you're writing about mad experiences, like what you're writing is a mad experience you had, like the madness kind of, the memory of the madness will like overdub your experience to the point that it's something quite surreal and quite other. But I think that does, for me anyway, protect me maybe from the sort of cinematic replay, if you like, of that experience. It becomes somehow adjourned or distorted in a fascinating way.
I think
It reminds me. Go on, Caroline.
I think there are so many different doors into the same experience. You can, you could write 100 poems all about the same thing, and only you could know it was about that same thing. I mean, like there are, in terms of like surrealism and conceits and ideas, and I mean, you've got the memory, but then you've got thousands of different like receptacles that you could decant that memory into, rather than having to actually write it in a naturalistic way. Often I find if I am very uncomfortable, but if I desperately want to write about something, but I can't bring myself to actually paint the reality of that picture, I don't try to paint the reality of that picture. It doesn't obviously want to come out that way. I will let it go into the language of dreams. I will let it seep in to other things. But then there's another thing of like, sometimes I've had big things happen to me, but for some reason I don't want to write about them. Like they don't inspire me, even though I feel like they should. But then you just don't worry. You can't control the bits of your life that you get obsessed by, and for what reason. You might find, I've written 10 poems about that time when my seatbelt broke, but I haven't written a single poem about, my dad having a stroke. So, like the time when your seatbelt broke might be if you zoom in close enough, might be a metaphor for all of the other things too. As soon as you write about something in a real event, it becomes metaphorical by nature of the focus on it. So, and also you might write about it in 20 years' time. There's no linear process to when you have to use your memories and how you have to use them. It's just about giving yourself constant permission to know that all of it is yours.
Yeah, and things can creep in where you didn't expect them to. I think that's really interesting. I think this is a really nice question from Claire Gulliver, saying she's interested in self-care as a poet. So you guys are all sharing difficult experiences, and I think this is especially pertinent kind of like today when we're all not even in the same room, in a kind of being able to experience that sort of sense of community. What did she put? How do you protect yourself? And I think when you're putting work out there as well into like the public sphere, how do you kind of approach self-care as writers?
I think it might be the poetry itself that's self-care, because I don't know if I'm speaking for all of us here, but when I write a poem, I really don't know where it's going to end up. Even if I have a form to it, the only thing I know is that it might be that it's becoming a certain form. I don't know what the answer to what I'm exploring is. And I think it's probably self-care to go through that process of expression and find out what you're trying to say.
Yeah, there is a solace in knowing that your imagination has agility, and so even when you're reading back a poem that really hurts, it energizes you, and there's a thrill to that. But I find with performances, I will feel weird afterwards. Like I feel like there's been something chipped out of me slightly, but I always feel like that, and occasionally if I don't feel like that, I know that I've been on autopilot somehow. It's never a simple thing, but then if I don't read my poems for months and months, I feel really bottled up in a different way, but I think it's all bound to make it's not easy to you can't be a poet and fully protect yourself all the time, because you are using you're using every bit of your own ingredients, and we live in a world that tells you that's not safe. We live in a world that teaches us not to say these things, not to go there, not to stay in small talk. But poetry cuts straight through the small talk and goes to the heavy conversation immediately, right? And that's dangerous and uncomfortable, but you learn to enjoy the discomfort and to find a mischief in there, and and a freedom, I think, which compensates for the awkwardness.
One other thing, when you were just saying that, like Caroline, it really made me think that actually the experience of madness itself is very similar, for me at least, at points, to what you were saying about poetry. Like, madness doesn't do like the normal day-to-day chit chat. You're not thinking they're like absolutely terrified in your room because there's like, the inside of your head's having a conversation with you about the weather. Like, most of the time it's when that conversation becomes really horrendous, or starts telling you like absolutely incredible, insightful things. You're like, oh, I didn't know that this bit of my brain or this voice over here is talking to me about that, and that's pretty fascinating. But so a lot of the strategies I find really useful to protect me from the potential danger of poetry are the things which enable me to live as someone who kind of embraces aspects of mad experience, but without wanting to just do away with it or medicate it away completely. But I do need to be in control, and that's like discussing it with other poets or other writers, or it doesn't have to be poets or writers, or anyone who thinks that way, and the support of peers. Like, I think poetry, at least in like in the Western world, is kind of like set up as this really isolationist, and like someone goes up the mountain and speaks to the muses and comes back down, and I think an episode of madness is sometimes seen a bit like that. But one thing which was incredibly important for me in my recovery from those experiences is to be like, oh, there's loads of other people out there who are mad and who hear voices or see things that other people don't see, or think about the world in all these twisted ways. And you can find that companionship in other writers by reading their work, but also I think protect yourself by making friends with people you can talk about these things with, whatever that is, the sort of the support of peers, or just people who you feel comfortable speaking. That for me is the most important thing. Whether it's safe to read a lot.
Sorry.
Oh no, it's all right. I was say where it's safe to put it in a poem or not. I guess when you have people you're safe with, you can try it out on them. So and they might be like, well, you probably wouldn't want to read that in public.
Yeah, I was just agreeing. I was just saying that poetry is this beautiful parallel universe where we don't have to pretend to be normal, but therefore do feel normal.
Yeah.
I think it's really, really great what you're both saying about like a kind of, it goes hand in hand with community as well, and with connecting with other people. It's not about like, just disappearing inside your own head and writing your diary. It's so much more than that. It's communication, isn't it? Like, yeah, I think that. There's a question here from Susan Downer saying, to be a good poet, do you need to have studied poetry? I'm interested in how much these poets have studied poetry forms, or whether you just write with the rhythm of your own emotions.
I think the rhythm of your own emotions, I think people do teach poetry, as I have done, and I suppose I still do. But my first subject was classics, and I wrote when I was in junior school. So I think it's coming from the heart and having something to say that matters most.
It depends on what you mean by study. Like, so I've never done a creative writing degree or anything like that. But I read poetry all the time, but not in a way that I think you want to devour as many different types of poems as possible and create almost like an echo chamber inside your own brain where you can hear loads of images and voices, and then you start to, the more you read, the more you start to kind of hear yourself in contrast to that. And in company with that. I don't think you can write a good poem if you don't read poetry, because it's just like, you need to listen to music to play the piano. It's not magical. It's you practice, and imagination is a muscle. Like, the more you practice with your imagination, the more trust you have in that it will catch you when you start writing. The more images you read from other poets, the more heightened the color in your brain gets. But you don't have to read a poem and analyze it when you read it. For me, the poems that really help me in my writing, I don't try and paraphrase them. I don't do what you do in an English exam and kind of go through them like a crossword. That doesn't help, because that's when you're writing a poem, the metaphor can't know it's a metaphor. Like, you want to be inside the reality of that poem and just following, letting one image generate the next image, generate the next image. You don't want to be like studying each line as you're writing it, because that will paralyze you. But I think reading as much as you can, as widely as you can, is really vital and exciting. So yeah, it's work, but it's glorious work, and anyone can do it, you know. Well, we need to have that, we need libraries. But yeah,
I would totally echo what the other two have said. It's definitely about writing with the rhythm of your emotions, and a lot of I know Jerry mentioned that I'm doing a PhD, but a lot of my work in that is actually trying to sculpt out a place for the legitimacy of mad responses to poetry. Because what I'm interested is like how I'm studying William Blake, so I keep bringing him up, but like how William Blake makes sense to someone who's on a psychiatric ward, and like what reading that poem means for them in terms of what world it takes them. How does that change the way they're thinking about their own reality? How does that justify maybe some of the ways they think about the world? Definitely not in like that interested in what literary form is getting used or breaking it down into little pockets of meter and stuff like that. Stuff, I think, like Sarah said, can be a way, like it can be really powerful. I don't really write in like form. I just let's see what happens. I'm maybe quite lazy in that sense, but I think it can be like really useful. So I definitely wouldn't shy away from experimenting with it, but I think feeling like it's a prerequisite to understand what like a villanelle or something is before you're allowed to actually enjoy poetry is just total garbage.
And we're very nearly at the end. I just wanted to ask before we go, if you could give any advice to anybody who is kind of wanting to start writing as a way to maybe better understand what's going on in their own head and didn't quite know where to start.
I would echo what Caroline said about reading, because the Poetry Library or the Scottish Poetry Library or wherever you're based is a fantastic resource, and as well as local libraries. And I think you need to get poets who you almost kind of imitate a bit to then find your own voice. So yeah, definitely reading.
Write a first line that has an image in it, right? Anything, like there is a man crying in the crematorium, there is a dog juggling on a car, whatever. Write a first line that has an image in it, and then write for 7 minutes from that image, right? Just get some like actual text and imagery on the page. You're not trying to create a poem, but just to kind of show yourself that your imagination, if you just let your pen go forward, will come up with stuff just like your sleeping brain does every night. If you get into the practice of not trying to immediately write a poem that means anything, right, that you could name in advance, write first line with an image in it, fling open the door of that first line, write for 7 minutes and then stop, and keep on doing that, and then start writing some poems and then some read it, but prove to yourself that your imagination can generate language and imagery, and then go from there, rather than trying to start by saying something profound, right? You want to try and get into the practice of letting the poem speak back to you. It's a process of discovery. A first draft is all about stumbling and seeing, and that's it. That's how to get started.
I think that's really good. Reading loads, writing loads without being worried about it becoming a poem. And I think one extra thing I'd say, specific to kind of the writing of mental health or madness or whatever you want to call it, is that that's already like super rich with metaphor, so you can do it because your brain's already generating images, because no one like wakes up depressed and says I feel flat and have low affect and all these psychiatric terms, where it's like Caroline's poem kind of translated. You feel emotions, and the way that you're probably without even noticing them will be feeling those is as metaphors. You'll say, I feel like hot tar sinking into the mattress, or I feel my brain feels like fireworks. I might be like, whoa, or like I feel like electricity is coursing through my thoughts, or everything's going too fast. I feel like I'm racing a car down the road. But the great thing about those things is, instead of being symptoms, those can be starting points to writing. And you need to be careful, I think, like we've kind of constantly said, because it can be dangerous, but also it can be the way that something which sometimes can get taken away from you and turned into just illness and something you're waiting to end can be explored, and you can find, even in some of the darkest places, new meaning. And that, like Caroline said, and that the imagination is really exciting. You can do it once you realize it's there and it's working for you. When you're in a kind of scary place, finding your imagination and using it in that way is just, you don't need to worry about the finished product to see where it takes you.
Thank you so much. That's a really lovely note to end on. And yeah, I just want to say a massive thank you to all three of you. I think I've worked you very hard this evening. And yeah, big thank you to the festival for like having us for this event. I think all the events that have been on as part of the Sheaf Poetry Festival can be rewatched on YouTube. So if you want to have a look at the rest of the programme, please do that. And yeah, thank you to you, the audience, who I can't see, but I'm imagining you're kind of out in front of me in my living room. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.